Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about Citizens United, campaign finance reform, and corruption, all mainly in the context of the United States government. For a while now, I've been considering making a short about how I've become a single-issue voter, and that single issue is getting the money out of politics. The reason why I decided to make a full-blown video rather than just a short talking about, how I've become a single-issue voter is because there was recent news where there's new legislation in order to amend the Constitution such that they would overturn Citizens United. The important section is Section 3. It's only a 2-page, resolution, so it's quick to read. But Section 3 says Congress and the states shall have the power to implement and enforce this article by appropriate legislation and may distinguish between natural persons and corporations. This is what Citizens United does, is it makes it so you don't make this distinction, or other artificial entities created by law, including by prohibiting such entities from spending money to influence elections. Okay, so why is this important, or why do you really need to get the money out of politics? Well, if we take a look at the statistics, the candidate who spends the most money usually wins. How strong is the association? For House seats, there more than 90% of candidates who spend the most money win. From 2000 to 2016, there was only one election cycle where that wasn't true. In 2010, in which case it was an 86% of the top spender won. You can see the statistic here for both the House and the Senate. And it's important to emphasize when just digesting this type of statistic is that this is a correlation, not a causation. You can also make an argument that this effect isn't as strong as it looks because it might just be the case that people tend to give more money to the candidate that's already more likely to win, which, fair enough. However, I do think 90% is especially disturbing. You can't do a study where you isolate the two because this is the real world and you can't conduct a study on an election where it's a control group or a real election. So it's impossible to get data that is not tainted by this sort of correlation versus causation problem. 90% is a lot of percents. And in my mind, you basically get to buy elections. And why is this a problem? Because it encourages candidates, not who are the most meritorious or the best legislators or the best governance. Instead, it encourages candidates who are the best at raising money. And so this is what our system currently encourages candidates to be. And as long as corporations are able to give money, what it does is it encourages them to kowtow mostly to corporations because corporations can give the most money. If it were the case that private citizens could give the most money, this would be a little bit different, although I don't like the idea of, rich private citizens lording over poor private citizens because this would be the effect. But instead, corporations can donate the most money, so corporations are the ones that legislators have to cater to because these decides who gets the most money, and the ones who get the most money tend to win. And you can look at this as a sort of survival of the fittest type of mechanism where all of the politicians who don't kowtow to corporations just don't make it because they are part of the 10% who get less money, and so they are unlikely to survive, and there's only a few, people who what's on their mind primarily is public good rather than, catering to the corporations. What this would do in reversing Citizens United and going with this legislation that makes it so Congress can, get the money out of it, it doesn't guarantee that the money gets out of politics. It just allows them to differentiate between people and corporations to get it out of politics. So I'm interested to see what types of spins might be made in terms of trying to argue that this is a bad thing, but this is a good thing. Now, as it stands, you can find a sort of description of why this is important on Adam Schiff's website. He was the one who put forth the legislation. I don't know if he drafted it or what have you. I assume that he is just kind of the leaderboard or the leaderhead of this. And you can see who it's sponsored by. Which brings us to talking a little bit about how I've become a single-issue voter. It's not just campaign finance reform in regards to Citizens United that I find important. But what I have decided to do is every single incumbent, regardless of any other platform issue other than campaign finance, if they do not do something to further campaign finance reform or get money out of politics or decrease corruption, I'm voting against the incumbent regardless of any other platform issue. This means I will be voting against Democrats. I'll be voting against Republicans. I don't care. I want the money out of politics. Single issue. The money is what taints everything. Everyone people have been wanting, this is like an 80% issue. Like 80% of the population wants Citizens United overturned. It's not getting overturned because the people who would theoretically try and overturn it can't win elections because, that's what determines what they win elections is their ability to take corporate money. And so that type of person's never going to get in power. And so this is why, in order to get these types of politicians in power, my estimation, you have to take a hardline stance, be like, this is the only issue I care about. So let's talk about a little bit about corruption and about how it's not just limited to who can take the campaign contributions. This book is the book I read that gave me a lot of the background on corruption in terms of like interpreting it. And in it, they make a bit of an interesting distinction, which let's go over here. And they define corruption in a particular way, which is that corruption is necessarily illegal activity as it is defined from a technical perspective. Otherwise, analysis of it becomes too subjective. And what this means is that if it's legal, it's not corruption. In the United States, what we have is quite a bit of legalized corruption is a good way of thinking about it, although you would not technically want to call it legalized corruption. It would be legalized conflict of interest between the public good and the private interest of the elected. And so, well, what do I mean? Well, for example, companies that are, not companies, or kind of companies, politicians are allowed to own stock, and they can own shares in the company, and they can own an interest in the company, and then they are passing legislation which affects the companies that they own. And not only this, they will know ahead of time what they are going to legislate on, like, for example, if you're going to have a massive subsidy on electric vehicles, and then they will know that they are going to put money in. A good example of this, and anyone is welcome to correct me if I am wrong on the facts in this regard, but Nancy Pelosi's net worth is in 9 figures. And I don't mean to pick on just like Democrats specifically here. I am, after all, talking about how I'm happy that a Democratic bill is going through. But let's talk about Nancy Pelosi. To my knowledge, Nancy Pelosi has only ever served as a public servant, but her net worth is $120 million. Why? Because she can make really smart investments. Why is that? Because she can pick and choose stocks. And she can pick and choose stocks with information that other people don't have access to. And she shouldn't be allowed to do this. Which isn't to say that, they shouldn't be allowed to invest money, but if you're a legislator, you should only be allowed to invest money in stocks or like mutual funds that track the market, something like this. And you should not be able to invest in individual stocks because it lets you just put money in, put to stocks are going to do well, and also pass laws to make the stocks you own do better. Like if you want an example, like another example is Joe Manchin, for example, has a lot of coal, by my understanding, he has a lot of coal stocks or ownerships in coal companies, which makes him less likely to do something involved in green energy. This is not the limit of the conflicts of interest you can receive, and again, kind of picking on Democrats here, but like Chuck Schumer has 2 daughters. One of them is literally a lobbyist for, I can't remember if it's Amazon or Facebook, but there's an obvious conflict of interest between the public good and private interest here. But having a conflict of interest between public and private good is not what drives elections. Unfortunately, what drives elections is how much money they're able to raise. If there was not so much money in politics, something like having a conflict of interest would become more of a factor in determining elections. And maybe someone like Chuck Schumer, who has a conflict of interest because his daughter's a lobbyist, would also cause some sort of, maybe it would be harder for him to get elected if it wasn't about money. And another thing I wanted to mention about the conflict of interest and the legalized corruption we have in the United States, which, it's tongue-in-cheek calling it legalized corruption because, again, it is legalized conflict of interest, is that there's only like a 1-year period, grace period. I think it's 1 year. If that's incorrect, someone can let me know. Maybe it's 2. There's only a very short period in which you're not allowed to switch to being a lobbyist from being a public servant or vice versa. And what this means is a whole lot of the people who lobby for government, on the Hill, as it were, have previously been legislators themselves. And what they end up happening is when they switch off of that job, they get this super cush, 6-7 figure paying job, basically talking to their homies in Congress. And this is an obvious conflict of interest because while they were not given money explicitly for services rendered in Congress, they are being rewarded financially and also rewarded for their nepotistic connections that they still have in Congress, which is obvious. The service they are providing in terms of, lobbying their former co-workers, let's say, is not commensurate with the amount of money that they are getting to do it. This is very reminiscent of how, following the 2008 collapse, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Hilary Clinton got, 6 figures to do speaking engagements at various banks where, you speak for 45 minutes and you get 6 figures. This does not seem like a reasonable compensation, and instead it's, compensation for services not yet rendered. And, okay, well, they could just take the money and run, but it comes back to this. Everything comes back to your ability to raise money in the future, because this is going to determine your ability to keep winning elections, because the money is so important in the elections. And it's important to some degree not to demonize the politicians themselves, although to some degree they should be demonized, but in fact look at it as a systemic problem, because the system rewards the type of politicians who are good at raising money rather than being meritorious in terms of providing public service. Because the public service is not what's rewarded. What is rewarded is your ability to win elections, and your ability to win elections is tied to the money, which brings us all back to Citizens United, which is, in my mind, just the thing that I always come back to. I'm just like, Citizens United, it's the only important thing. Legislation, and let's read through Section 3 again. Congress and the states shall have the power to implement and enforce this article by appropriate legislation, and may distinguish between natural persons and corporations or other artificial entities created by law, including by prohibiting such entities from spending money to influence elections. Emphasizing, it makes it so Congress can make it so that the corporations can't give money to elections, which, if you disagree with that sort of sentiment, feel free to post it up in the comments. But almost everyone I ever speak to would rather that corporations cannot give money to people. And I'm just like, they can't give money to campaigns. And I'm searching for anyone who is of the opinion that they should be able to. And the only people who have particularly interests are either people who have enormous shares in corporations, as far as I can tell, or the people who are benefiting from such contributions in such relationship, i.e. politicians who are taking money. Okay, so how does the amendment go forward? To be approved, the amending resolution must be passed by a 2/3 supermajority in both the House and the Senate. There's another way to do it, but that way is almost never used, which is you can do the demand a constitutional convention. The way this works is if 2/3 of state legislators vote to demand it, Congress is required to convene a full constitutional convention. I think that this has only ever been done once. Just as in the Constitutional Convention of 1787, delegates from every state would attend this so-called Article 5 convention for the purposes of proposing one or more amendments. So, since this is not a common method, the way we just look at it is it must be passed by a 2/3 supermajority in both the House and the Senate. And what I'm going to do is invite you to maybe look at this my way, which is this. Unless I can find a problem with the language of all 4 of these sections, which to me seems eminently reasonable, Congress and the states should be able to impose reasonable viewpoint-neutral limitations on raising and spending money by candidates to influence elections. Congress may regulate and enact systems of public campaign financing, including the design to restrict the influence of private wealth by offsetting the raising and spending of money by candidates and others to influence elections with increased public funding. Section 3, which we've discussed multiple times, and Section 4, nothing in this article shall be construed to grant Congress or states the power to abridge the freedom of the press. Okay, so can't interfere with freedom of speech, and this is it. It's 2 pages. Barring finding a problem with this, any single one of my representatives who does not support this, I am going to vote against. Now, I understand currently that's all Democrats, and if you're Republican, I feel you here, but I'm fully prepared to be on this boat in terms of if a Democrat doesn't support this, I am voting against them as well. I am on the left, but really single issue voter here. And further, I might even take this further and write my representatives regarding a constitutional convention, because if 2/3 of the state legislators vote to demand it, Congress is required to convene a full constitutional convention. So you can even apply this to state legislatures as well. Since this doesn't really happen, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I could do it, where write my reps, say, if you don't ask for a constitutional convention regarding campaign finance reform or getting the money out of politics, I'm voting against you. No matter if you're a Democrat, doesn't matter. Republican, doesn't matter. Independent, doesn't matter. Libertarian, which is what I actually identify as, doesn't matter. The only thing that in my mind is worth caring about is getting the money out of politics, because as long as the money is not in politics, first of all, you will have the legalized corruption where they just take money for their own private interest from the public, sphere. In terms of how you get 9-figure net worth as a public servant. It's just disgusting. But also, it rewards this kowtowing to the corporations rather than the public good. And so I at the risk of beating a dead horse, I should probably cut this video off a little bit here, but I invite you to look and follow this legislation that is proposed. This joint resolution, I believe he has a fancy name for it. Let's see. The Democracy for All Amendment. I invite you to follow this, which the whole point is to close legal loopholes that allow wealthy mega donors, corporations, and special interest groups have exploited far too long, and return power to the people once for all, blah, blah, blah. I encourage you to follow this. Follow if your reps are voting for it or how they're voting for it. It's just a single one. And if they are not voting to support it, I invite you to vote against them regardless of their party. And just vote against incumbents, or also just write your legislators and say, this is what I will be doing. This is what I'm going to be doing. To all of my reps, I'm going to say, if you don't support this, I'm going to vote against you regardless of any other issue. I want the money out of politics. This is the only thing I care about. In my mind, there has just been so much partisanship that is created on the back of just actually just kind of achieving gridlock is kind of the goal, where you can have a system that is just supporting the mega corporations because the candidate that gets the most money wins, and you create this artificial gridlock through partisanship is, I think, what this encourages. So nothing gets done, and you just make citizens afraid of the other side as a means of creating this gridlock and getting nothing passed. And for the most part, I have not talked to a private citizen that likes Citizens United, although, to be fair, if I liked Citizens United, I'd keep it a secret too. So you can write your reps, ask them to vote for the Democracy for All thing. And this is, by the way, single issue. I don't think I would ever encourage all my viewers to do a similar thing for any other piece of legislation that is not on this type of issue, but I'm doing it now. Anyways, if you have any thoughts on the matter, feel free to put them in the comments. You can do the YouTube algorithm stuff, like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, if you did not enjoy the video, you could probably just click back on... I feel like I should give this advice. I've never given this advice before, but if you don't like my videos, you can click back, see however it was recommended. There's a triple dot option thing. You can click it, and you can click block this channel, and you'll never have to see me again. This will help you out if you're in that camp, and have a good day. Bye-bye now.